Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the General Eclectic podcast with Rod Dreher. I'm your host, Cale Zeldin, and we are struggling with our tech, are we not, Rod? How are things in Budapest?
Good God, things are great in Budapest, except for the tech. But I think maybe we have it figured out. But I'm having a great time here in Budapest. The spring has sprung. The government is letting people into bars and restaurants again if you have a vaccination card, which I do, and it just feels like things have really turned the corner here.
That's good. So, I know for our watchers, our listeners, you just had Easter, so happy Easter to you. How was Easter in Budapest?
Budapest is, Hungary is a Catholic country with a sizable Calvinist minority. There ain't many Orthodox Christians here. But in fact, Viktor Orban, the prime minister, is a Calvinist.
I did not know that.
And side note, this is an interesting part of Hungarian history I just learned from some reading I'm doing. Mm-hmm. A lot of Hungarians joined the Reformation because this was their way to protest against Habsburg rule. The Habsburg family was synonymous with Catholicism, and this was their way to rebel for the sake of sovereignty, becoming Protestant. But anyway, all that is far in the past now. But I went to a Serb church, a Serb Orthodox church near where I'm living, and didn't understand a word of it, but people were very kind and got to receive communion. And
that's great.
Just to be with it was just a wonderful thing to be with these people from, the other side of the world. And I met an Italian guy there, get this, a Sicilian who had converted to Orthodoxy a few years ago.
Really?
We could kind of tell that, we could tell that we were both foreigners there. We went out to lunch to a tapas place for lunch afterwards. And
Funny.
It was great.
So what was that conversation like? I mean, I don't remember your Italian being necessarily, no. So you just sort of pigeoned your way through, huh?
Yeah, no, we did. His English was better than my Italian, but no, we had a good time. And it was really startling though, and sad, the sort of thing that we talk about all the time, the collapse of the church, the collapse of certain aspects of our civilization. Well, it's very much on his mind. And he said in Sicily, where he's from, he said the churches are empty.
Yeah. It calls to mind something that we attempted to talk about last week, which was a piece that you wrote on your blog about Spengler, Oswald Spengler, and I have to say I'm rather surprised with your reputation, Rod Dreher, that you had not been overly familiar with Spengler, because Spengler is not exactly a sunshine and roses type of historian. I just sort of assumed he was up your alley, but you had not really done much with Spengler up until then. So tell us a little bit about Spengler and Rod Dreher.
Right. Well, Oswald Spengler was a German historian who came to real prominence in the early 20th century with a book with the ponderous title, The Decline of the West. And I tried to read it years ago, but it's very dense, and I just never got around to it. But
it's peculiar too, right? I mean, he is sort of peculiar, even though it's in translation. It is peculiar, right? I mean, he sort of has these sort of esoteric categories that he's working on, so it's not exactly immediately accessible, is it?
Not from what I know. Like, I still haven't read it. The reason it came to mind was Paul Kingsnorth, and we've talked about here before, the English writer, had an essay at his Substack, which is still free if you want to subscribe, paulkingsnorth.substack.com. And he talked about Spengler's theories of civilizational rise and fall. Mm-hmm. And roughly speaking, Spengler believes that the West has gone from a period of Apollonian civilization, which is to say the Greeks, to Magian, M-A-G-I-A-N civilization, which is the religions of the Middle East, Christianity coming out of the Near East and taking over Rome. And then it went into a decline. And the decline is from an over-civilization and over-sophistication and from wealth. And Spengler believed, again, he's writing this about 100 years ago, believed that we were in terminal decline now. And Kingsnorth accepts that.
Yeah.
And believes that the best thing we can do now is to try to pull the pieces together, not try to save what can't be saved, but to try to figure out ways to prepare for rebirth. and this tracks along with the Benedict option
Yeah, I was
too.
just say it resonates.
It's so interesting, Kale. Stream of consciousness. Yeah, just late last night, I was talking on Signal to a young Pole who's organizing a conference at a university in Warsaw. I'm going to next month. And he said that he had not read Live Not by Lies at all and had not read the Benedict option, but he's a conservative and a Catholic. And he said, man, I tell you, things are falling so fast here. And he knows a lot because he's in his 20s and does a lot of work online. He said that TikTok is the vanguard of all this, of the cultural disintegration. So we didn't have, it was late last night. We didn't have time to talk.
Yeah, so I'm familiar with TikTok, of course, because I teach high school, and it is not to be overstated, it is ubiquitous. I mean, every one of my kids, nine out of 10 kids has it on their phone, and man, they are on it for a long period of time every day. I mean, I jokingly, I poke before the bell rings to start class. There's passing time. I'm kind of chatting and bantering with the students, and some of these kids are, and this is not an exaggeration, Rod, are on TikTok for hours a day. Just that app.
That's messed up. But this, I was told by a Polish high school teacher last year. He said, "Listen, everything you're hearing about my country and the collapse of Catholicism is true." And he said that it's all social media driven. He said there's not a single institution in this country, not the church, not the state, not the family, that can compete with TikTok in terms of socializing the young. And this young Catholic I was speaking to last night said exactly the same thing. And this is his business. He does a lot of media work.
Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, it's been interesting. One of the things that I've run into here in Hungary is, if you know anything about Hungary and the Hungarian government of Viktor Orban and his party Fidesz, you know that they're very conservative, very nationalistic, and very much about sovereignty. And they're absolutely despised in the West,
right,
by Western governments. But one of the things that Orban's government did last year, I believe it was, or a couple of years ago, is they withdrew government funding for gender studies programs in the universities, and withdrew government accreditation because they want to stop it. Well, you can imagine the hue and cry that went up. And normally, Kale, I would have been the sort of person who's like, the government shouldn't get involved with gender, with telling universities what to do. But when you see what's happening in our country, where this stuff has run rampant out of the universities, has run through society, is now becoming the law, you realize these people have to protect themselves. And I applaud the government here for doing what it takes, this illiberal thing, to protect itself, because we see it has taken over our country, and you see what it has done, and you see how incredibly malevolently illiberal it is. They've got to do something.
Yeah, I think it bears chewing on here for a second, and maybe we can tease this out a little bit. But I mean, I think we need to think through, why would a government fund education to begin with? And I'm not going to come at you with some sort of libertarian argument here. So that's not what I mean by this. But on some level, we as a body politic recognize that part of the public trust, that is the funds that are raised collectively for various common goods, such as roads, et cetera, utilities, we recognize that these things are best done when we can do them collectively. And so in theory, we recognize that to publicly fund educational institutions, K through 12 and higher education institutions, is in part for the good of the body politic. And so I'm not opposed to that. I think that that's a good thing. I think we have state universities for good reason. Obviously, we can push forward in certain lots of STEM fronts with technologies and all of these things that are sort of geared toward the public good. Again, in theory, but I think part of that contract is that the humanities have always been part of that mechanism by which we come to better understand ourselves, both at the individual, but most importantly on the collective level. Like, we are a people, and again, that does not mean that we have to be ideologically in lockstep, and we live in the age of
Mhm.
pluralism, and that's what we are. But what happens when the funds that are used, the public goods, right, are being used, the common weal is being used as to weaponize forces that would attack the body politic? I think that's an important conversation to be had, and there are no blank checks. I would submit that the universities on some level have to have a tacit agreement with us, the people, we the people, if we're talking in an American context, um, that what they're doing is for the general good.
Yeah, yeah.
And I don't think it is right now.
No, no, of course it's not. And but one question that what the Hungarian government has done, and by the way, the French government I just saw today, the education minister is floating a proposal to
Mm,
ban gender ideology in French public schools, and they should if they can. The
yeah.
problem is the whole TikTok thing.
Okay,
There's
so explain that. Make that leap for me, because I'm not sure I understand where
Mhm.
you're getting at
Yeah,
with the TikTok thing.
because the government can do what let's say the Hungarian government, it bans gender studies, or it actually has not banned them. You can still teach it, but they're not going to give you degree credit. They're not going to pay for it. But let's say that they were able to ban it entirely. Well, TikTok knows no borders,
Right.
and this ideology is passing through social media into the hearts and minds of these kids. And it's a sort of thing that, and this gets to the limits of the approach of our friend Sora Momari and Adrian Vermeule and others as to how to fight this. I mean, I, I think that there has to be a political and a legal element of it. But if we can't find,
But remember, Rod, fair enough. But it's also the case that, we have these protections. Like, for instance, in our own country, we have these protections guaranteed by the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. That we that to protect us against governmental tyranny. You have made a career in the last couple of years talking about extra governmental tyrannies. I mean,
Mhm.
to me, we can talk about the government and the suppression of free speech. I think you and I are both pretty clear on the record, of that. But what about, what if the tech companies, in this case, we're talking about TikTok, but we could be talking about Twitter and
Mhm.
YouTube and Google and Facebook, et cetera. What happens when they are effectively more powerful than the government?
Yeah.
And you and I are talking
Yeah.
about culture.
No.
You and I are
Yeah,
talking
yeah,
about
sure.
culture.
I know. But see, but this is one of the things that I'm learning in a very quick, in a very fast track way here,
Mhm.
is how inadequate liberalism is on all sides.
Mm.
Because in a liberal society, things should, the marketplace of ideas, things should work themselves out, et cetera, et cetera. Well, people on the left say that the Hungarian government and the Polish government, too, some of these Visegrad countries, they're illiberal. And Viktor
Right.
Orban has said, he's democratically elected, but he said, I'm going to build an illiberal
Yeah.
democracy.
Yeah.
And I should point out that there's an election coming next year. A lot of people here, even supporters of the government, are saying the government might lose. And,
Yep.
this is not an autocracy. If the government loses, they'll be gone. Anyway,
Yep. Yep.
there is that. But what happens when, using the mechanisms of the free market and the language of the free market, you have what we have in America, which is essentially an illiberal society where the Hungarian government is not doing anything as repressive as what is actually being done by major corporations, by the media, and so on and so
And
forth
schools
in
and
our country.
schools.
And
We
schools,
really,
and schools.
it's a huge cultural delivery device, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Uh,
And so, but that's kind of the red pilling that you get over
mm,
here is,
mhm.
whatever the problems are over here, you look back to our country and see how incredibly illiberal, indeed, quasi totalitarian it is
Mhm.
becoming about left-wing things. And let me bring up the George Soros thing again, because that is something everybody throws at Hungary. Oh, Orban is an anti-Semite. He hates George Soros, who's the Jewish billionaire who's spending a fortune to turn Hungary into, a very liberal, democratic, pro-LGBT, pro-immigration, and all that. The thing is, you realize when you get here and talk to actual Jews, he's not anti-Semitic. They feel so safe here.
Right.
It's what the West has done to demonize this man because his target is a man who happens to be Jewish. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to go, sorry to go off of the Soros thing, but again, it's just part of the red pilling to get here and realize what a bill of goods we've been sold. And I don't know if you saw this, Cale, this week, but the freaking CIA has now gone woke.
Yeah, I did see this. Of course, our audience should know that I'm taking a temporary fast from Twitter because I have a lot to do in my life at the moment. And it's hard.
Oh no, because you're a sane person.
It's hard for me because I suffer from serious FOMO. But that's a sort of a weirdly intellectual FOMO. I just really want to know what people are talking about. So I've been off of Twitter, and I feel okay, to be honest with you, but I do feel out of the loop. But anyway, I happened to catch, I believe you posted this yesterday on the new woke CIA. I got to tell you, I kind of thought it was a joke at first.
I know. It's like, for those who don't know about this, the CIA has just released onto the web some new advertisements to recruit people, and they're profiling different people who work at the CIA. There's this one woman. She says, "I'm a cisgender, intersectional Latina who has some mental health issues."
Yeah,
it's and I'm proud. And there's another guy who works in the library there who's he's got a ring through his septum, and he says he's a gay man from the South. And isn't it wonderful to work at a place where I'm affirmed and all that?
Finally, it can finally happen. I mean,
But the reason I bring it up in this context of our conversation is the left, the cultural left, has absolutely captured all the institutions in American life. When the military and the Central Intelligence Agency are openly woke, you realize how far it's gone.
It's amazing.
So put it in that context. I heard from a reader of my blog who works in that field. Let's just leave it at that.
Yeah.
And he said that, that in the Washington establishment, even among the neocons, they think that Viktor Orban is a fascist who doesn't deserve to be in power.
Like an actual fascist.
Yeah. I mean, and it's a complete lie. And this my reader was saying it's a total lie. But he said this is what happens though when you recruit only from you follow the elite ideology, elite cultural ideology, and you see the world through that ideology. And this reader of mine said, our intelligence agencies can't understand the world because so many of them come out of this woke elite prism through which they view the whole world, and they can't recognize what's happening. But here's one of the problems. One of the things I'm worried about that I've seen here, Cale, is the Hungarian government has just made a deal with the Chinese to open a massive campus of Fudan University here in Budapest. Fudan is a Shanghai university, one of the top in the world. Really is a great college. And this will be their first campus outside of China. Well, the reason they're doing this, according to the government, is they need high quality universities here. They have a lot of universities, but they need world-class universities here. And, but it's also the case that, they're sucking up to China.
Yeah.
It worries me because this is clearly going to be an espionage center. No doubt about it. Mm-hmm. And I think that they shouldn't do it. They shouldn't get in bed with the Chinese. But I began to see, though, why they feel so pushed into the arms of China and Russia, because the West, the European Union and the United States are waging constant war on Hungary, on its sovereignty for cultural reasons, trying to force it to be something it doesn't want to be. Mm-hmm. And I think this is I'm not defending they're going to China. I think it's with the Chinese. I think it'll be a Faustian bargain if ever
Yeah,
there was one.
yeah,
But this is what's happening to these little countries who are being rolled over by our woke institutions.
yeah. I think the
Sermon over.
no, no, that's fake. That's what we do, Rod. Come on. No, but I am struck. It can only point to a perception on the part of those sort of non, if you look at, not like the smaller players in the world scene, if they are willing to kind of get in bed, so to speak, with China and receive Chinese funding, I mean, it can only mean that they're reading the proverbial tea leaves and seeing that America's a mess, the West, but really America is a
Yeah.
mess, and they're not okay. In other words, full stop. We are not okay.
Yeah. I think you're right about that, and I think that more countries like Hungary, as the West, especially the United States, becomes more and more decadent, we're going to be surprised by the number of countries who turn to Russia and China. I mean, it's happening all over Africa now. The Chinese are making a massive investment in Africa to
Yeah.
try to win it
I have
into
been,
their.
Rod, been doing that for 25 years plus. 20
They
years,
have
I
been.
would say.
I was talking. Yeah, I was talking to a Hungarian who was defending the government and its approach to the universities. I was arguing with him, and he said, "Listen, whatever problems the Chinese are going to bring with them, I guarantee you there will not be wokeness at Fudan University, Budapest." And I
That's
credit
it.
that. I think that in an effort to, but here, think if you're Hungarian, think about this awful position you're in. You're between a Scylla and Charybdis,
Yeah,
or however
totally.
you
No,
say
yeah.
it, a
Still in
rock and a
Carbetus.
hard
Yeah.
place.
Yep.
Thank you. Say it again.
Scylla and Charybdis, or Carbetus.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, good. I won't make that mistake again. But think about it. These are Western people. I've done a lot of reading in Hungarian history this past couple of weeks, and the king who founded modern Hungary, King Stephen, Saint Stephen, in the 11th century, he made a decision. His father, King Geza, was a pagan king who made a Catholic. I mean, the two churches were still one then, but
Yeah.
he let him be baptized by a representative of the Bishop of Rome, the Pope. And this was hugely important because it oriented Hungary to the West.
Right.
St. Stephen's mother was Orthodox, in fact, a Byzantine princess. But Hungary's fate was tied to the West permanently in the 11th century by that baptism. These are Western people, but they are being driven away from their natural, from their own civilization, because their own civilization is so radically far from its roots and from reality in terms of ideology, of globalism, of gender ideology, and all that. So they're having to turn to these tyrants of an alien civilization for protection.
Yeah, I find Budapest to be fascinating because it really is kind of a liminal space. I mean, it really does occupy the space between things in so many different ways, and so that's why I think it's fascinating that you're there. Because I think it affords you a certain lens or perspective or standpoint with which you can sort of see the fault lines from a slightly different angle, which I think I think you're sensing is sort of illuminative for you. But my sense is, one of the guys that I like to listen to, he hasn't been doing his podcast lately. I think he's spending loads and loads and loads of time on Clubhouse and Instagram. But Eric Weinstein, mathematician, I think he works for Teal Capital or something like that. But anyway, he has talked a lot about the idea that we have been in a nap, that we in the West have basically been asleep and enjoying this oddity of history, and we are in the midst of waking up to find that we have in many respects lived in this unreality. Now my take on that is that we are finally exhausting the fumes of a pre-existent sort of Christian world with a Christian, basically Christian morality. This is Tom Holland's point, of course, and that we are only now
Mhm,
sort of
mhm.
recognizing that there may be a world that is not all that savory, that is more truly post-Christian, and we should be a little concerned about what that world might look like. I mean, you can argue, all the sins, and we can rehearse all the sins of institutional Christianity and individual Christianity. Fair enough, I get that. But what happens when you have a civilization that not only drifts away from its mooring, but we have a university system and a cultural production system that are actively sawing away at that
Yeah.
mooring. And then what is going to happen, Rod?
Yeah, well, good question. You and I
Yeah,
will live to see it, and certainly our
yeah,
children will.
for
I mean,
sure.
I was thinking as you were talking about two things that we have to deal with today that no civilization ever has. We have to deal with social media, TikTok, things like that, this global instantaneous communications system that can spread all kinds of ideas at the speed of light around the world,
Like that.
and undermine we talk about liquid modernity in the
Yeah,
past. Well, this is beyond liquid. This is turning liquid modernity into gas, right?
yeah,
To use the metaphor,
yep.
and also pornography, which is tied into that. Has human civilization No human civilization has had to deal with these two things, and I think that they're both they're not the same thing. Pornography depends on this medium of transmission to be sent around like it is, but they're tied together, and I
How
don't
so?
I think it's
Tease that out, or make connect those dots for us.
yeah. Yeah, well, um, porn, obviously, you and I grew up in the 80s, right?
Yeah,
70s and 80s.
yeah,
And if we wanted to go look at pornography, we had to find some friend whose dad had a copy of
yeah.
Playboy or
Right,
Penthouse.
right.
It was very tame compared to what's now. Well, now all a little kid has to do is roll out of bed, pick his phone up, and find incredibly hardcore porn, yeah, exactly. And that changes things. I mean, we've all heard now about how doctors, psychiatrists are seeing, or neuroscientists are observing changes in the neurons of
Yeah,
people. And you're finding young men in their early 20s who are sexually dysfunctional. Yeah.
yeah.
So this is because of porn coming to them through this medium.
Mhm.
I guess
And
my
it also
connection would be, first of all,
it has the ratchet effect too, right? That the that it's not innocuous. In fact, it does rewire,
right.
vis-a-vis sort of
Yeah.
neuroplasticity. Um,
Yeah, and I was looking at something the other day. A friend of mine who's a feminist in Australia had posted. She's a Christian
mhm.
feminist, and they were her friends who are psychiatrists and psychologists in Australia are reporting like early teenage girls, 13, 14, who are coming to them thinking that sex is supposed to hurt, like be beaten up and be choked, because this is coming through porn, right? What civilization has ever had to deal with this degree of corruption, of destruction being mainlined into the minds of its young?
There is none. There is none.
And in a sense, coming through the internet. No, no, no. There's nothing. And porn is one particular thing, but also ideas like gender ideology, Black Lives Matter, the anti-racism, which are pulling civilization apart. And I don't know that China and Russia are part of this too. I don't know what kind of restrictions they have on the internet uh, there. I know that China has pretty significant restrictions, but if they are, if they're saying they'll keep stuff away from their people because it is destroying, it is like a virus. We've been all walking around with masks on, and doing some is making the body, it's killing the body politic.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. I've been really chewing on this idea. That it is interesting to me that we are in the midst of an actual viral pandemic. But at the same time, we're dealing, so the one is sort of operating on the genetic level. But with this other one, this sort of mimetic, sort of to use the genes memes
Yeah.
concept, I think the mimetic virus is frankly way more dangerous in the long term than
Oh yeah.
this viral genetic pathology pandemic. I mean, really, and you sort of, we're talking about a form of suicide. Um,
Yeah.
that I'm talking collectively, of course. I'm not talking about at the individual
Sure.
level, but you have actors who have captured, and I know people are probably sick of me saying this, but like, we vastly underestimate the amount of institutional capture that has occurred. And so that, this is what I mean, like when you wake up from a nap, if you fall asleep and all the various, forces are in their various positions, and you go to sleep for, I don't know, 75 years, and then you wake up, you're like, oh my gosh, the pieces on the table have moved around, and now we're completely surrounded. Like, well, what do you think is going to happen when you go to sleep? And what do you think is going to happen when you are playing in this world of pretend?
Yeah.
So where we are waking up from this, and I like to hope, I'd like to think that there are a reasonable, cadre of folks who are willing to fight back against this, but I don't know if there are enough of us.
No,
Sorry, I
no,
don't know.
that's no. And that's the thing people don't want to hear, and they don't want to hear it for an obvious reason because it's terrifying.
Yeah.
But
And for you and I, as we're social conservatives, but we're really religious conservatives, and our social conservatism flows from our religious traditionalism. It's not as if the churches are a refuge from this. They are as infected with this virus, this mimetic virus, as any of our other institutions.
yeah, I've been talking to just in the past couple of weeks by email with some clergy friends back home, including an Orthodox priest. And the Orthodox priest was telling me that their clergy, like him, are slammed because the congregations are splitting over politics, are splitting over COVID.
Mhm.
This one priest told me that half his congregation said that they went to him and told him they expect him to monitor the politics of online politics of the other half of the congregation and to kick them out if they are too right wing. I mean,
We're
of course
mad.
he's
We're,
not
we're
going to do
mad.
that,
We're
but yeah,
mad. We're crazy. We're crazy.
yeah, but I'm hearing the same thing from both sides, left and right.
Yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
mentioned before on our podcast, these two Southern Baptist pastors in Baton Rouge who are conservative guys, but they left the ministry because they couldn't take it anymore. They were being beaten up from the right for not being political enough.
Yeah.
It,
It's a bad, it's a bad sign. I mean, and that I wonder if we suffer from a kind of inability or unwillingness to take the larger view. We've been so conditioned with electoral politics. We've been so conditioned by social media to really focus on the hyper now and like what just happened and what's about to happen. And if we don't do this,
mhm.
I mean, I'm old enough to remember when everybody told me that the world was going to end because of some internet policy uh, that they were going to vote. Do you remember this? It was like a web neutrality or something. Like, do you remember this?
Yeah. Net
And
neutrality.
net neutrality. And I got to tell you, like, I read up on it. I tried to educate myself. I still don't understand what the whole net neutrality thing was about. But we were told that the world was going to end then, and it didn't. And so I feel like we're just conditioned to kind of run on this treadmill of outrage, and we're refusing, I think, to take the to take the larger picture in. I don't know. It seems so unrooted. It seems so unbalanced.
Well, it's the little things. Just today on my blog, you might not have seen this. It's so weird to get used to. I'm 6 hours ahead of
Yeah,
you on the
yeah,
East Coast,
yeah,
and
yeah,
I'm posting things that are in the middle of the night for you, and
yeah.
I'm like,
Yeah.
"Good morning, time to post some." Anyway,
Good thing
one
I'm
of
a
my
morning
readers,
person.
Yeah. One of my readers sent me a screenshot of something from a camp activity, some website that's used by kids to, by families to organize their kids and get them hooked up into camps and different activities. And he sent over the thing saying that, and you can see this on my blog, um, saying choose the gender of your kid. And the guy was pointing out, he goes, this is how it happens, right? This is not some, gender theory class. This is the most meat and potatoes, everyday family kid stuff there. And he said, this gets in people's minds now that this is normal. He goes,
Yeah.
you're not going to get this out of it anytime soon.
Yeah.
And this shows you how far the revolution has gone. And this is a sort of thing that now is completely unremarkable and nobody remarks on it, but it's happening.
That's interesting. Yeah, no, it's sort of like death by bureaucracy or something like that. It's a
No,
click. It's a click on a spreadsheet.
This is what I put on my blog. It is. On my blog, I quoted something from Live Not by Lies I heard from a Polish a historian who runs the John Paul II Institute in Warsaw. And he told me, talked about the corruption of language. He said, we who grew up under communism knew that language couldn't be trusted, that the communists were constantly taking words and using them to mean what they didn't mean. And if you accepted communist language as representing reality, you were sunk. And he said, so we learned that was a way of vaccinating ourselves against manipulation. We knew that they lied, that their words did not mean what they claimed to mean.
Yeah.
He said, today we have this whole generation here in Poland, and this is, of course, true about us in America. They don't have this protection at all and don't know that they should have that protection. So we're seeing the whole concept of family, of male and female, all of this stuff is being re-engineered through language by these woke people. And, we saw it come out of the, we thought it was crazy when it came out of the gender studies faculties. Well, now it's on an intake form at a suburban
Summer
children's.
Yeah. Yeah.
But this is the fact that it's not remarked on, the fact that it's not remarkable anymore shows you how radical it is. And I think the only hope that people like you and me and our listeners who sympathize with this have is to do what the Kamila and Václav Benda did in Czechoslovakia under communism. And I write about this in the book. They had to actively tell their kids, this is a lie.
Yeah.
We're living in a society of lies. And that's a hard thing to do. Most people aren't going to do it. And most people couldn't do it under communism, and they conformed.
Yeah. And I, I'm an English teacher, and obviously I sort of staked my whole life on the idea that words matter and that poetry matters and that stories matter and, language matters. And I fight with myself on this. My tendencies tend to be a little bit more libertarian, and just in terms of, oh, look, I'll present certain things, and and I'll let the kids come to to own it on their own. And I'm always tempted, like, do I have to start kind of talking about this? Like, and again, with like my own children, sort of pulling a Benda move and saying, look, guys, you're going to hear X, Y, and Z, and you maybe have already heard X, Y, and Z, and it's wrong. It's a lie. And I'm going to tell you this right now. We're freaks. We're the crazy people. At least that's how, we're going to be. That's how we're going to be met. Be wise, be prudent, but understand that this stuff is not true. And I've found myself doing that more with my children than I certainly ever expected. I mean, my mom and dad didn't sit me down and talk about, the corruptions of the language and the corruption of storytelling and the corruption of politics. And they didn't have to.
They didn't have to, but now you do, and the fact that so many people, middle-class people like us, don't want to face it. And so by not wanting to deal with it, by not wanting the hassle of dealing with it, they consign their children to this lie. And it's a terrible thing. But I want to end today on a happier note, and I'll have more to say about this next week.
Good.
Here in Budapest, they opened last year a cafe called Scruton, after Roger Scruton.
That's great.
yeah, and his wife, Sophie, his widow, Sophie, came over and gave a few of Roger's things for them to keep as sort of relics there. But what they want to do, the people who opened it, I think it's one of the local colleges, they want to have a gathering place for conservatives, young conservatives especially, to come have coffee, to talk, to just hang out and to be together. And it's a really bright, cool place. I've been by there. It hasn't really been, you can only get takeout coffee until
Right.
like just this week, right?
Yeah.
But they've opened up again. And on tomorrow night here in Budapest, I will be giving a presentation there. They have
No way.
a room in the bottom with a small stage where people can gather, and I'll be there. Well, actually, I'll be interviewed by the head of the journalism department at Matthias Corvinus Collegium, a college here. I think they're the ones who opened this thing. But I'm really looking forward to it because one thing we conservatives are not very good at is building community.
Yeah.
And I think that if they can pull this off, I mean, they opened Scruton, I think, right as COVID was hitting, so it really couldn't get off the ground. But now that everything's getting back to normal, it'll be interesting to see because any college that has any sizable number of conservatives there, conservative students, ought to have a place like this to come together
totally.
and talk and hang out.
Yeah.
A safe space.
Yeah, I know it's sort of funny, but no, but I mean, I think that that's sort of carving out these communities, these spaces for these communities that I do think is, I while I do think that there are plenty of forces that are arrayed against the true and the good and the beautiful, I do think that there are a lot more people out there that if you sort of poke them a little bit, I think they kind of want to say, God, don't you guys think that some of this stuff is crazy? And I think this is crazy. And I do think that there are more people like that. But there's a real government of what are there's a phenomena that people talk about that, you hear crazy things, but you don't know if you can say anything. And so you're sort of governing yourself. And I do think that there's a lot of that going on. And so I think we need to be a little bit more bold about kind of outing ourselves, so to speak, and sort of speaking against this, and not in any kind of dour or bomb throwing capacity necessarily, but just like, hey,
Yeah.
other people who are saying, I think that that's important. And hopefully, people will gravitate to, shows like this. We're not afraid to talk about some of these difficult things, but at the same time, we're not I'm certainly not depressed exactly. I'm trying to be wide-eyed about it, but I want to carve out space to do the things that we really do care about, like being with each other, talking with each other, eating with each other, drinking with each other, enjoying good stories and good art together, all of those things. And what that has been such a casualty, not only of the COVID mess, but it's been a casualty of this hyper politicization, and
Sure. One of the one of the men I quoted, I think that one of the Russian dissidents who lived out by lies said, "You've got to have something to be for, because if all you are is against something, you can get really crazy there." And look, I've met so many interesting people here in Budapest. I'll meet more at Scruton tomorrow. I went on Sunday night to something called a ruin bar. It's
cool.
was founded 20 years ago. Simpla Kurt is its name, and they opened it up in the ruins of an abandoned factory in the Jewish Quarter, which is right next to where I live. And it was just sort of it's like a thrift store type bar. It's a huge space, to a bar, a cultural center, and it is the coolest thing. You just go and hang out, and there are other ruin bars that opened up since then, and it's do-it-yourself culture, and there are ideas. We need we need to tell the truth about the darkness, but there's light in the darkness, and I'm finding some of it over here.
It reminds me, just this last thing. It reminds me of something we talked about in one of our earlier episodes about, there was a tablet, there was an article written in Tablet, the online magazine, about the flatness of sort of postmodern life. And it sounds to me like a bar, like what you're talking about now, is sort of the complete antithesis of that kind of smooth, frictionless existence of going from one Starbucks to the next Starbucks. And this is sort of the antithesis of it. It's kind of a mess, but in a kind of great eclectic way.
In a wonderful way. Now, I'm sure that every single person, I was almost a grandfather there when I went. I just had heard about Simpla wanted to see it, but I felt like a grandpa in my politics, but who cares? It was a
Yeah,
cool space, and it was a wonderful space. I texted a friend of mine back in St. Francisville, Louisiana, about this place, and he said, "We got a rowing bar here. The Silver Dollar Cafe's roof fell in. Let's
yeah.
open it up and make
I,
it into a
I
hipster
know.
place."
I mean, that's the funny thing about being from Louisiana is like, you go to, there are a bunch of ruin bars all over the place. New Orleans is an entire city of
Oh
sort of
yeah,
ruin bars. So no, it's great. All right. Well,
it's
Rod,
a
thanks.
ruined city.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's part of its charm for sure. So, all right. Well, look, we got the
Yeah,
show in.
yeah.
This is important. I'm glad we found something to work. And we will do another show very shortly hereafter. So, on that note, thank you everybody, and I throw it to you, Rod.
Don't get nothing on you. I got to learn how to say that in Hungarian.
I'm really looking for the Hungarian version of "Don't get nothing on you." All right, you take
Bye,
care.
Kale.
Bye now.